So welcome everybody. Hope everyone had a reasonable lunch. I take a bit of the silence. Possibly lunch wasn't reasonable, there you go. So this session, it's a new session for the updated schedule. We're going to have a look at what's new with content types in SharePoint 2010 and also what's new with metadata in SharePoint 2010. Content types was quite a big thing in SharePoint 2007. They had some limitations, so we'll have a look at what's been improved using content types in SharePoint 2010. And we'll also have a look at what's been improved and what's been added to the system. There's quite some nice functionality around metadata now in SharePoint 2010 as well, so we'll have a look at that. We'll try and keep the presentation as sort of demo orientated as I possibly can. So we'll try and kind of keep it quite active. I managed to get some demos working now, which is always a bonus. Otherwise, we kind of get to kind of imagine things working, which is not really the same result that you ideally want. So my name is Craig Carpenter. I'm actually one of the co-owners of Combined Knowledge. We're a SharePoint training company. I've been in IT 20 odd years really, pretty much my entire career. Training-wise, I've pretty much been training for about the last 12 years on and off. Microsoft products, sort of, general courses, and obviously, with Combined Knowledge, we've been dedicated to training SharePoint for the last 5, 6, 7 years now. Something like that. My email address, if you want to grab it, craig@combined-knowledge.com. If you want to ping me any questions after the presentation, I'm more than welcome to try and respond to those. I can't guarantee this week, certainly, that I'll get back to them straight away. But I will check that email on and off, so you're more than welcome to ping me any questions that you have. So the agenda that we've got for this afternoon, really just quickly having a chat about information architecture and why the concepts of information architecture are important to your organization. That then leads us on to talking about content types and metadata, which are two technologies that SharePoint provide to help us with our information architecture. We'll talk about content types as they were in 2007. Hopefully we all know and use content types in 2007 already. So we know how powerful they can be, but we also know maybe some of the limitations that we have with content types, how they're utilized in 2007 currently. We'll have a look at what's new with content types in 2010. So we'll have a look at the new content type publishing functionality that Microsoft have introduced with SharePoint 2010 using the managed metadata service that's new. So we'll have a look at content type publishing. We'll create some content types. We'll publish them. We'll see those content types can be used in other web applications, other site collections throughout our SharePoint farm. Once we publish those content types, we'll see that we'll pretty much use them exactly as a normal content type would be used. There's very little to distinguish a published content type from a content type that's been locally created within that site collection. It's kept very, very straightforward. We'll talk about metadata then. So we'll talk about the concepts behind metadata and metadata taxonomies that we could create in SharePoint 2007. So we'll have a look at, we'll chat about and remind ourselves about what sort of things that we could do in SharePoint 2007, and then we'll have a look at what's been introduced with SharePoint 2010. So there's some quite nice functionality with SharePoint 2010 in having a centralized term store for tagging of documents and tagging of items. We'll have a look at creating some of those terms. We'll have a look at some of those terms in use as well. And then we'll talk about the managed metadata service very quickly as well. So really information architecture, I've simplified it into kind of two things. I know information architecture is considerably more than this in real life, but I've simplified it into really two things. Puttability and findability. Puttability is kind of one of these made up kind of techie words. It's not, but it's all about how do we put information into the system, putting that information into the system in a structured way. Findability how do we get to that information again afterwards? Yeah. Those two things go together. Yeah. My information is is only findable if it's been put into the system in a structured and an organised and a consistent manner. Yeah. If I want to look for information based on something like a product number or a document ID, I have to know, what metadata that product number or that document ID or that cost center code, I need to know what metadata that is using. I need to know the name of the column that's being using for that. I need to know the structure of the data that's going to appear within that column. Yeah. If we have something like a document reference, for instance, that we want to make sure that all of our documents have, one of the issues that we can have is because SharePoint is designed to be a sort of distributed management model, we can have multiple people managing SharePoint sites, all of whom are creating document libraries, all of whom are then creating columns to hold our document reference number. Yeah. But they might all create those columns in completely different ways. Yeah. One person might call their column document reference, one person might call their column docref, one person might just call it reference. Yeah. And we end up with multiple columns, basically all representing the same data, but all the columns are different. So even though the actual metadata within those columns may be consistent, the column names themselves aren't. And it makes those documents less findable, because I can only find those documents if I know what the metadata column is called, as well as what metadata is used within that column. Yeah. So we can expand the terms, really. Puttability gets defined as really, it's just the quality of putting content into the correct location with the correct metadata. So not only have our users, or not only have our information workers got to be sure that they're putting documents into the correct place within SharePoint, they've also got to be ensured that they're tagging that document with the correct metadata to make that document findable at the end of it. Yeah. We know we can create views, we can do sorting, we can do filtering on that metadata. Yeah. But the metadata has to be there and accurate before we can do that. Yeah. It's also the degree to which we put quality information into the system. Yeah. It's not just technology that's going to help you with that. You're going to need to put in place governance and policies to dictate if users are going to use metadata, how they're going to use metadata, the sort of metadata that they're going to put in place. You may want to have documents that define metadata column names that users can use, metadata values that people can use. We've worked with some of the banks in the UK, and they have large amounts of documentation about, they call it tags and tag values is the phrases that they use. So a tag would be a column in SharePoint's terminology. So they have a definition of what tags you can create, what columns you can create. Effectively, what metadata can you store against these documents. Depending on the classification of that document, and that document would be classified by a key person within the team, that then dictates what tags or what metadata columns can be created, and within those columns, what values can be used. Yeah? And that gives them a very consistent way of storing that metadata against those documents so that those documents become findable again. Yeah? The truths around puttability, the saying what goes in is what comes out. If you put garbage into the system, you're going to get garbage out of the system. If you put inaccurate, inconsistent metadata against your documents within SharePoint, it makes those documents very, very difficult to find. If you only work with a small subset of those documents, you get used to the way that the metadata is against that small subset that you work with. If you work with a much larger subset of documents, you have to be aware of how all these different teams of people have tagged their documents. Even though they've tagged them to represent the same thing, they will tag them in completely different manners, potentially. Yeah. If users have to spend time thinking about how they're going to tag those documents when they put them into the system, they're simply going to push back. Yeah. All the user wants to do is to store the document somewhere quickly. Once they've created that document, they want to store it on the system as quickly as possible, move on to the next thing that they've got to do. Yeah. If they've got to then spend time thinking about where that document's going to go, what metadata columns potentially have to be created to classify that document, and what metadata they've got to fill in about that document, they're simply going to push back. Yeah. The key to this is to provide sort of help or to provide metadata that users can simply select from. So rather than have users have to go and look up in a completely different location what metadata values they can use, or have a user simply have to think of what metadata values to use, we can provide those metadata values for the user to select from. Yeah. Findability is directly impacted by what putability practices we have in place. So the better we can get users to put data into the system, the better we can get users to classify that data, and the easier we make that process to be, the more findable our documents are going to be. Yeah. What we're trying to build into the system here is ease of use, but consistency at the same time. Yeah. Getting consistent metadata into the system, but making it easy for the users to select that data. Yeah. So findability. It's all about locating the correct information. Yeah. Either locating it via search, locating it via category headings that we may well have, sorting, filtering within a list or a library to get at the data that we want. Yeah. It's all about locating that information. The more findable an object is, the easier that object is to locate on the system and use. Okay. We've got some facts and figures, or we've got some numbers a little bit later that will actually show you how important findability is within documentations. If you think about how you use documents and how you use information within your own businesses, and we're no different at Combined Knowledge as well. Yeah. We fall into exactly the same traps that everyone else does about finding information. The simple truth about findability is you cannot use information that you cannot find. It's no good knowing that that information exists somewhere within the organization. It's no good knowing that somebody somewhere has created that information, therefore it must exist. If you can't find that information when you need it, you simply cannot use it. Yeah. Information that can't be found is worthless. Yeah. So it goes to the, it's the other side to that first point. Yeah. Not only can you can't use what you can't find, but that information, it may have been created, it may be the most perfect example of that document or the most perfect example of that information that you've got on the system, but if nobody can find it, it's completely useless. It's a complete and utter waste of time, that document having been created in the first place. Yeah. So there's, you can be losing out in many different locations here. You can be losing out the fact that somebody's just wasted an inordinate amount of time trying to locate that document in the first place, and they've completely failed to do so because the document hasn't been tagged correctly, it hasn't been stored in the correct location, it's got inconsistent metadata against it, whatever the reason may well be. Yeah, it may not even be put into SharePoint. Yeah, it may be a document that someone's created and they've got it stored on their local machine still. Yeah, it may be in the email system. Yeah, I emailed it to you. Yeah, well, I'm not looking in email, I'm trying to look for it on SharePoint. Yeah. So not only have you just wasted time trying to locate that document, but the person that created the document in the first place has also wasted their time because they've created a document that no one's going to use because no one can find it. Yeah. And chances are someone, either one of those two people or somebody else is going to have to waste even more time by having to recreate that document, simply because we can't find the original one. Yeah. Even the person that created it can no longer find it. They had it in email, they can't find it on their local machine anymore, they can't find the email they sent for it, or they can't get to the attachment within the email. No one else seems to have the email either, so we end up recreating the document again. So if it's hard to find, it's hardly used. Yeah? So the key to success here is to make information easy to locate within the business. Yeah. So, why does it matter? Yeah. So this is an American study. This is a couple of slides that I stole from Bill English's presentation that he was going to do around information architecture. But basically, the average number of hours per week spent just locating information within a business is around 6.5. That's per person. Yeah. 3.5 of those hours is simply trying to find something and failing to do so. Yeah. That could be one document, it could be a couple of documents that they're trying to locate. They need it for whatever they're doing, and they simply cannot locate those documents on the system. 3 hours is then spent recreating those documents effectively because they need that data, they need that document. The only option they've got is to basically recreate it again. Yeah, so they're redoing that work. Yeah, and if that document that they recreate isn't findable in 2 months' time or 6 months' time or whenever it's needed next, guess what happens? It gets recreated again. Yeah. You can put figures around that. You can work out, you know, what an hour is worth to you, to your business, and then work out what that is worth per week. And that's per person within your organization. Some estimations. Worldwide, it's estimated that over 30 billion documents are created per year. It's estimated that the cost of creating that document, that's simply creating the document. The cost of creating that document is around 15% of the organization's annual revenue. 85% of those documents are then never used again because they're never retrieved. 50% of those documents are a duplicate of another document in some way, simply because we didn't have the information to hand. We couldn't find the original document, we couldn't find the person that created it, we created the document again. 60% of the documents stored on systems are in some way obsolete. Yeah. They're out of date, they're inaccurate, they're wrong. Yeah. But nobody knows it because no one's seen them. Yeah. Nobody can find the information. How do we know that that information is correct in the first place? Okay. When we talk about findability, who here instantly thinks search? Quite a few people. Yeah. It is a common sort of thought process that people go through. As soon as you talk findability, it simply says, well, search, that's the solution to findability. We put a search product in place. SharePoint has a search product. There's third-party search products that bolt on top of SharePoint as well. We put a search product in place. That solves our findability problems. Well, search only works if you know what to look for. Yeah. Search is focused on you trying to find the information based on essentially knowing keywords that are appropriate or match that document. So you need to know either information or words or metadata that is within the document itself, with held as metadata alongside that document within SharePoint document libraries. Yeah. So unless we have that metadata in place, all we're relying on is simply the contents of those documents. And if we rely just on the contents of the documents, chances are what we'll get when we search for that document is not only the document that we're after, but we also get 100 other documents that match that content. And now how do we know which is the right one? Yeah. How do we know from that search results which is the document that we actually want to get back? Yeah. Key thing for understanding findability really within your organization, it is not just technology. Yeah. Just using SharePoint, just using search, that is not going to resolve your findability issues within your organization. Yeah. It is how you use that technology. It's the policies and the processes that you put in place as an organization to allow your users to put in relevant, accurate, consistent data into the system against the documents that they're storing there. That's what's going to make the documents more findable. Yeah. What you have to do is help your users do that. Yeah. Make it easy for them to put that data in place against the documents. Okay, so content types. Let's go on to the fun stuff. So, we all know content types from 2007. Yeah? Hope we do. So, just a quick reminder what a content type basically is in the grand scheme of things. SharePoint, we have a number of kind of templates and definition files that define what we get when we create something. So when I create a new site in SharePoint, I select from a list of templates on the site creation screen, and those templates are fundamentally either site definitions or site templates that my users have created. And those templates or those site definitions are going to define things like what lists and what libraries I get in the site by default. They're going to define what web parts are going to be there. They might define the theme. They might define the page layout potentially, or the security that's put in place. They define how that site looks to begin with. Yeah? The same thing occurs when I go to create a list. Yeah? I go into the create screen, I select from the various different lists or the library types, and I'm essentially selecting either, again, a list definition that's already on the system, or a template that one of my users have created, and that's defining the metadata profile, so basically the columns that are there, what columns are present, what types of columns there are, whether those columns are required or optional, all the various settings, all the default views are going to be within that template. Maybe even some content within that list if it's been put there. Yeah. The content types define the items that go into those lists and those libraries. Every list and library in SharePoint uses a default content type. Fairly straightforward to understand. If you create something in a document library, you're creating a document. If you create something in a task list, you're creating a task. It's pretty straightforward, really. You can work the rest of them out for yourselves. Yeah. But the content type is what defines the metadata used by that object. So when I create a task, I get a series of columns I need to fill out. Some of those columns are required, some of them are optional. That is defined because I'm creating a task on the system. The task is defined as a content type. If it's a document content type, the document template is defined. Yeah. When I create a document library out of the box with SharePoint, and it's been the same way since sort of SharePoint 2003 onwards, really, I create my document library, and I have to select the template within that document library. Now, in SharePoint 2003, we were kind of inflexible, and we couldn't really do a lot about that. We can go into the system at a later date and change the document template that was used, but the document template was affixed to that library and we couldn't alter that in any way. Yeah. With SharePoint 2007, Microsoft introduced content types. And all of a sudden we could unlink the metadata and the templates and the various settings like workflow and information management policies. We could unlink all of those settings from the list or the library and link those settings to the actual type of item we were placing into that library. Yeah. By default, each list or each library defaults to a single content type that we can use. It's not a difficult task to add additional content types to that list or that library to give us additional types of object, and each type of object can have its own metadata profile, its own document template if it's a document. It can have its own workflow settings. It can have its own policies associated with it. So SharePoint 2007 content types gave us a massive amount of flexibility, but also standardization within our document libraries. Yeah. What we could do with content types in 2007 was, if we wanted to store multiple types of object in the same library, So different types of document, the most obvious for that is Word, Excel and PowerPoint. We wanted to store those different types of document in the same library. We could do very easily. We could create them from the library. We could add our own document templates into that list very easily. Each of those documents could have its own metadata attached to it as well. Yeah, each type of document could have its own workflow associated with it. So it gave us an immense amount of flexibility. What it also gave us was, because of the way that content types worked, it also gave us the ability to have consistency across our data. Yeah. Where before we were relying on everyone that created the library to maintain the metadata and to add the columns in and to call the columns the same thing and to create the columns of the same type, what we can do with content types is simply take the metadata and attach it to the content type. Because the content type is a much more global entity in SharePoint 2007, we can have consistency of that metadata. Yeah, having the metadata associated with the content type makes it much more consistent, makes it much more global. Yeah. So in 2007, content types were scoped around the site collection. Yeah. I created a content type. That content type is available in all sites, in all lists, in all libraries that are compatible within that site collection. But if I want to use that content type outside of that site collection, I've got two options. One is to manually create it again, but then I'm creating another content type. I've just got to make sure it matches the first one. The problem there is I've now got two content types doing the same thing, and if I want to maintain one, I've got to make sure I maintain the other as well. The other option I've got is simply get a developer involved. Have a developer create either a feature or a solution or some custom code that allows us to deploy or copy those content types between site collections. So they become, it becomes a developer or an IT task to deploy content types across the organization as opposed to being an end user task. Yeah, the end users know the content types that they want to create. They're the people that work with the information. Yeah. But it needs to be IT or the dev team that deploy those content types across the organization. What's been introduced in 2010 is we have a new site collection called the Content Type Hub. Content Type Hub in reality is just a normal site collection that has a content type publishing feature switched on for it. Yeah. From that content type hub, I can then publish content types to the organization. I create the content type in exactly the same way. There's no difference to the way that I create that content type. I go into my content type gallery, I create it, I set my metadata properties on it, I set my document template on it if I want that, I set my workflow settings, my information management policy settings. Yeah, I configure it how I need to. I then publish that content type to the organization. Once that content type has been published, it then automatically becomes available on any consuming web application. The web application consumes those content types based on its association with a service application. And it's a managed metadata service that handles publishing of content types in SharePoint 2010. So we have a new service in SharePoint 2010 called the Managed Metadata Service. The Managed Metadata Service pretty much does two things. One is content type publishing, it deals with that, and the other is creating terms and term stores and creating a taxonomy of metadata that you can deploy across the organization as well.
So does that allow the content types then to be used across site collections?
It allows it to be used across site collections, it allows it to be used across web applications, and if you have configured it, it also allows it to be used across forms. So it's truly global.
How granular is the subscription to it? So if you wanted to go across multiple web apps, but not every site collection in those web apps, can you do that?
Once published, it's consumed by every associated web application, so it's assumed by every site collection within that web application. So it isn't granular in that respect.
Can you unpublish?
Yes.
And does the management console see what's going on?
I can unpublish basically once a content type has been published, I have to assume that it's everywhere where it can be. Once I unpublish a content type, we'll have a look at this in a demo anyway. But when we unpublish it, one thing to remember is it's not removed from those locations that it's been published to. Okay. Okay, so let's go through this, and hopefully this will explain it a little bit better. So what gets published? So I create a content type, I've created it in the content type hub, and I've published it. Okay. What is published is the object itself, so the actual content type, whatever it may well be, a list content type or a document content type, whatever it is. Any metadata profile, so any columns that I've added to that content type, they are published as well. The column settings are published. So if I've added my document reference number, or I've added a column to my task list because I need it there. I need a column that registers who actually created the task or who requested the task, rather than who just created the list object. So I've added that column into the task content type and I've published it.
What if you use site columns?
I have to use site columns with content types anyway.
So does the site column get published across site collections and
Yes.
applications as well?
If it's a document set content type, there's a talk on document sets later this week as well. That gets published. If it's a document-based content type, the template file gets published. If I've got an information management policy assigned, that's published across as well. If I have a workflow assigned to that content type, the link to the workflow, the association to the workflow is copied across. The workflow itself is not. So if I'm going to use workflows with enterprise content types, I've got to make sure that those workflows are templatized, they're deployed as features, and they're available in every web application, in every site collection where those content types may be used.
But I think if that's not done.
Then I'll get a workflow association to a workflow that doesn't exist. Content type itself will still get published, it's just that we won't get the workflow for it. Okay, let's have a look at a demo. So what I've actually used one of the publishing templates for this. So this is not one of the sort of team site templates that you may have seen already this week. This is one of the publishing ones. This is my content type hub. Okay, it's just a normal site collection. What makes it a content type hub? If we come down and come into site settings, so when we get into the site settings screen, we can come into the site collection settings and we can find the site collection features. Because what makes this a content type hub is a feature against the site collection that enables the publishing of content types. It's that one there. That's been activated because when I created my managed metadata service application within central administration, during the creation it asked me which site collection I wanted to use for my content type hub. This is the one that I specified by its URL, and that's what's activated the feature against this site collection. Now what I've actually done is probably what's going to be the best practice for the content type hubs is, at the very least, you want to make this a dedicated site collection within your organization. Don't use a site collection that's used for everything else. Don't use your intranet homepage, don't use your HR site collection, don't use IT site collection. Have a dedicated site collection for this purpose. Yeah. What we've actually done, and what we're essentially, our thinking at the moment is to actually have a dedicated web application for this. So we've got I've created a web application here, something called cthub.trainsbydate.com. That's my domain name, and that's I've got a dedicated web application purely for the content type hub and nothing else. That gives me scalability. It gives me all sorts of options from an IT pro side, around these content types. depending on how many content types you publish and how many consuming web applications you have, potentially yes, it could be. Yeah, it's something that you would have to monitor in real life. Yeah, so the reason we're saying at the moment, dedicate a web application to this is, if you do find that you have high load in your environment, obviously not everyone is going to find that, right? So, some people are going to publish maybe, 4, 5, 6, 10 content types across their organization. Some organizations are going to be publishing hundreds, if not thousands, of content types to many web applications, many site collections. In those situations, the load on this could be quite high.
So if I have like say 30,000 site collections, right, and I'm introducing new content type, is there like a time window that goes for each site and publishes that?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that runs through web application?
Yeah. I'll show you those. Okay, so within the content type hub, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to the site settings screen again. And we're going to go into the content type gallery as we normally would do. Now I've already created some because I've been trying to get this working just before we started. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new content type. So there's nothing fundamentally new about the creation of content types in 2010 versus 2007. The way you create them is essentially the same. The default content types you have are all there from 2007. You've got some new ones in 2010 as well. So I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to call it Craig's Demo Content Type 3. Guess how many I've created already. Okay, so I'm going to place this in, I'm going to select a parent. What I'm going to do is, let's do a document. So I'm going to make this a type of document. So we're going to base it on the document content type for that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to place it in a group. Now what I'd suggest here is that as well as creating your normal sort of custom groups that you would have for your custom content types to organize them at the site collection level anyway, have one specifically that says this is published. Because what I can do with a published site, with a published content type at the consuming site collection is a little bit different to what I can do with a locally created content type at that location. Okay, I'll show you the difference in a moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into my published group that I've created already. Okay. And we're going to click on OK. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come into advanced settings. And we're going to upload the document template. In a minute. So we'll locate some random document on the machine, and that one will do. So that will be our document template in this case. We'll click on OK to update that. And what we'll do is we'll add some metadata to it. So we'll add a existing site column. Let's pick one. Let's pick article date on that one. And then we'll add a new site column as well. We'll be imaginative and call it test. There we go. And we can go through and set information management policies. We can set workflow against this content type if we want to as well. We'll leave that for now just to save some time. What we're then going to do, and we'll only see this within the content type hub, is we then want to use the manage publishing for this content type link. And that takes us to this screen. We've got 3 options on this screen. Now 2 of them at the moment are unavailable. The content type is unpublished. We can tell that the content type is unpublished because there is no date on this screen. Okay. It does look on this screen like the content type is published because published is selected up here and there is no other option on this screen. Okay. Published is selected because published is the only thing that we can do. I can't unpublish this content type because it hasn't been published yet. Yeah. Likewise, I can't republish it either because I haven't published it to begin with yet. So the only thing I can do is publish. Yeah. You must remember on this screen not to go, oh yeah, that's done, I'll click cancel because I don't need to do that. Yeah. You must click OK to publish the content type. If you go back into managing publishing again, then we'll see that the content type has successfully been published. Yeah. I can now republish it or unpublish it. Okay, so we're asked about timer jobs. I need to run my timer jobs, because otherwise we are standing here for several minutes. So I have a content type hub timer job. I need to run this one first. This one runs by default every 15 minutes. I've just set this on my farm to run every 5. I'm going to run it manually now anyway. But this will run by default every 15 minutes. I'm just going to run it manually. And then for each web application that we have a consuming timer job or a subscriber job. And that by default will run every hour. But again, I've changed mine to run every 5 minutes. And what I'm going to do is just run it manually again. Okay. So once those two have run, we can pop over to our demo site, which admittedly does look remarkably like the content type hub, simply because it uses the same site template. But we'll come into here. We'll come into our site settings. We'll come into our content type gallery. And what we see is it hasn't quite made it yet. So there's the first one that I did just before the session started. I'll refresh this, give it a couple of minutes, just hopefully that the second one will come into here. No, it's not going to do it today. So we'll come back to this in a little bit. But this is the first one that I did. Okay. So if I come into here, you can see that what we can do with this content type is a lot less. We get none of the settings that we would normally get. Yeah. We can see the columns that are used, but we can't add any new columns to it. Yeah. We can't change the template, we can't change the workflow settings, we can't change information management policy settings. They're all modified at the content type hub site. I can use this as a parent for local content types if I want to, so I can create additional content types based on that one, not a problem at all. Yeah. Let's just refresh this. In fact, let's give it another try. Let's just rerun this job.
If you create new content types based on that, that's why it doesn't remove it from there.
Exactly. Plus you might have content in document libraries or lists that are based on that content type. So it won't remove it. Even if you essentially unpublish that content type from the hub, even if you delete that once you've done that from the hub, it's still going to remain at all the consumed site collections web applications.
Is there a feature telling you where that is being consumed? Finding it is a real pain.
Not easily, put it that way. If you've got what you'll have to do when you try and create a lookup list within a content type, you'll have to look up to another list that's within the site con gallery anyway. So it should pull both over. Okay, so I'm just going to see if we have it the second time around. If not, we'll move on. Okay, so we haven't got it a second time around, so we'll move on anyway.
One question, would it actually allow you to delete published content type, even though it's not going to remove it from the site? From right at the top.
From the hub?
Yes, would it allow you to delete it there?
Yes, no reason. You'll have to unpublish it first. There's no reason why you can't delete it after that.
You can remove it from the other subscribed site collections.
Yeah, you can. I mean, once that content type has been unpublished effectively, and you decide, okay, I no longer want it at the subscriber site collection level, you can manually go into the advanced setting, stop the content type from being read-only. As soon as that content type is no longer being published at the top level, all the settings become available to me anyway at the lower level. So if I want to remove that content type, I can do so. But obviously, as soon as the content type is republished, it gets made available to me again. Simple as that.
Are any of the out-of-the-box content types published content types, or are they just...
No, none of them are.
provisioned into the site?
They're all provisioned into the site collection as normal.
And
Yeah.
it has quite large implications for developing features that you deploy content types, lists, definitions based on that. So is there additional functionality within the development arena to deploy published content type and then deploy lists based on those?
I'm not a developer, but I would imagine so. You'd have to speak to one of the dev speakers on that.
One quick question. As a consumer site, could I actually say I don't want any content types from the content type?
No,
So I can't veto out.
you have to get them. Yeah, simple as that. Yeah. Okay. So, just quickly, publishing and unpublishing. Go back to the slides. Key thing to bear in mind with this. It's not a push technology at all. It's a pull technology. What I do when I publish that content type is I'm effectively advertising it at the hub. All of my associated web applications, based on the time a job that runs, will then go and copy that content type from the hub and copy it into the local site collections. Yeah, so the content type is copied. It's not a link to that top level content type at all. It is a copy. Yeah. If I make a change to the top level content type, I have to republish it to have those changes propagate down to all of the site collections that are using those content types already. Yeah. If I don't republish, any site collection that already has a copy of that content type won't grab it again simply because it already has it. It has to be re-advertised as being new, therefore it has to be republished. If I unpublishing it, all that simply happens is it just stops being advertised. Yeah. So my consuming site collections still have it, if they had it already. It's not removed from any of those content types or any of those site collections. It'll be seen as being a local site, it'll be seen as being a local content type at that point. I'll have the full, settings management that I had on a normal content type. As soon as it's republished again, I'll then obtain the latest version of it and it will go back to being a consumed published content type a second time.
So would that be a way of deploying a content type downwards and then remove it at the top again to allow local administration at the next level?
Yep. So you could do that. So I could create a whole lot of content types, publish them, let them deploy, unpublish it at the top level, and I've effectively deployed local content types at each site collection then. And then local site collection admins can then do whatever they want at that content type.
You need to think about governance issues. I mean, the whole point of keeping it on top is to govern it. So you don't want to ungovern it suddenly and let mayhem continue at the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on why you're deploying that content type in the first place. If it's just a straight sort of base content type that you want your site collection admins to maybe make use of or use as a parent, and you just want to get that base across the whole organisation, then yes, you could do it. If it's a much more controlled, then you probably want to leave it at the top level and control it from the top level down. Yeah. Okay, so publishing and unpublishing, it's simply a case of going back into our content type. Once it's been published, I can either republish it or unpublish it simply to stop advertising that content type. Yeah. Key thing to bear in mind though, once I unpublish, I'll just run the timer job again. But But once I've unpublished that content type, if I come in here, refresh, it's still there. Yeah, I don't lose that content type at all. Yeah. See if it's picked up the change there. No, it hasn't yet. So eventually what will happen is, this just seems to be taking a long time to come through. My other one hasn't come through yet. But these settings will be as they would normally be for a standard content type. Yeah, simple as that. It is a different web application, but it doesn't make any difference. Okay, so quickly then, because we are getting low on time. So metadata, 2007. Metadata, we basically have site columns. We can add a column to a content type. We can have a column within the column gallery. We can make that column available across the site collection if need be. But again, if we want to make columns global, if we want to make them across the whole organization, again, we have to have a developer involved. Yeah, we have to either have some feature creator that deploys that column into every single site collection, or we need a custom field type creating or some custom code that gives us that column and gives us that metadata in every single site collection. What we have in 2010, we still have site columns, we still have the site collection column galleries before, but we now also have the term store, also provided by the managed metadata service. Yeah. We have, within that term store, we have groups. Yeah. Groups act as a security boundary. Within each group, we can have multiple term sets to group terms together into sort of a like terminology. And we have the terms themselves, and the terms define the metadata that users can apply. Yeah. We have a column called the managed metadata column. It's a column type. It's also available in the default sort of document content type. A lot of the standard content types will use that column. Yeah. And that is tied to the term store. Yeah. What we can also do within 2010 is once we have metadata within our document libraries and our list, we can introduce navigation down the left-hand side at the bottom of the quick launch bar effectively, where we can use those terms within those metadata columns as navigation, basically just as a filter to the document library itself. Okay, so the service. So we have a new service application in SharePoint 2010 called the Managed Metadata Service. That provides the content type hub that we've already looked at. It also provides our term store. There's one term store per service application. Within that term store, we can create many groups, and the groups act as a security boundary. So I can have one group that is managed by one part of the organization. I can have another group managed by another part of the organization if I want to. Yeah. Within those groups, I can create term sets. I can have a maximum of 1,000 term sets per store. Yeah. Term sets allow me to group like terms together. So I might have a set of terms around technology products that we sell. I might have a set of terms around sporting products that we sell. Yeah, if we're a retailer and we sell many different types of product, then I may have different term sets defining all those different products. Yeah. In each term set, I then create hierarchies of terms. And terms can be within a hierarchy itself. So I can have, for instance, one term might be television. Underneath television might be plasma. Might be LCD. Underneath each of those might be the manufacturers. Underneath each of those might be the model numbers. The whole point of the term set is to give the user metadata that they can use. The managed metadata column will do type ahead. So it attaches itself to the term store. As I type, it'll do type ahead for me. But it allows me to reduce ambiguity within those terms. So if I put in television, for instance, it's not going to allow me just to put television in. It's going to say, well, you need to decide on what type of TV it is, what manufacturer it is, what model it is. You've got to basically select all the way down. Yeah. Example that we can use is sporting goods products. Yeah. We're a sports retailer. We sell many different balls. Yeah. Some are football, some are golf balls, some are basketballs, some are baseballs. Yeah. The last thing I want my user putting into the system against the metadata column for product is ball. Because I have no idea which ball they're on about. So what the managed metadata service will basically prompt them for, once I've set it up, is they type the word ball in and it will say, okay, well, what type of ball is it? Yeah, and they'll need to select the chain that that particular term sits in. Okay, so let's have a quick look. So I've got a document here already in the system. In fact, what I'll do, now that I've remembered to switch the screen, I'm amazed I've got this far without forgetting. So I'm going to add a new document into this document library. Now this document library, I've already got some terms set up. This document library already has the managed metadata column embedded within it. So we're going to add the column, or we're going to add the document rather, into the library. We will. So we'll click browser multiple times. Just finishing. Okay, so we'll grab another random document. What these documents are, by the way, they're all CSV files. They're all term sets. So one thing that I can do within the term store, and I'll show the term store quickly in a minute, is I can import a pre-created CSV file to define my terms. So I'm going to define them all within the term store management interface manually. So we have our standard name, we have a standard title field. I've added the color field. And for any Americans that did manage to get a flight, that is how you spell color, by the way. It's called English for a reason. But we have our managed keywords field. Now this is the managed metadata field that is part of the default document content type out of the box. Now I've already got some terms set up. I've not done anything to connect this to the term store. It's simply by the web application being associated with the managed metadata service application, and that managed metadata service application having that term store. I've typed in server as a piece of metadata, and it's come back and said, well, you need to tell me which of these servers it is. Yeah, so it's automatically picked that from the term store that I've already got. I've imported one of those term sets already. I can say, well, this would be actually servers themselves, the physical hardware, rather than being software or management license or whatever. I've got a color column that I've added in, which is just a simple choice column, which I'll select a value for down there. And we'll save that document into the library. So we'll just wait for it to do that.
Can you turn off the create new?
When you add managed keywords into here? Yes, you can. Yeah. Term sets can be open or closed. This one is open, which allows users to add data into it. It can be closed, in which case that disappears.
Can I just ask, what happens when you've got a lot of matching terms? What happens in the interface then? Because when we had a 2001 categories list,
Yep.
just found that people just pick the top one because there were so many, it can be bothered to scroll through.
To be honest, the interface I've not looked. The term tests we've kind of done at the moment have been up to about 10, which is within the interface, that's okay. I'm guessing that's going to be down to your governance. Yeah. How you define those term sets to make sure that when user types in values, based on the type of data they're going to be putting in place, make sure that the choice of terms that the system brings back isn't going to be massive.
From that drop down, I mean, I'm assuming that's some sort of Ajax read going on behind the scenes. And I mean, would you expect in a scroll bar there, or would it just sort of drop off the bottom of the browser window?
No, you'll get a scroll bar when it goes off that. So I've added my document in. What I've also got down here, this is my metadata navigation that I've set up. It's part of the document library settings. So literally all I've done is gone into the document library settings, configured metadata navigation, selected this column as being the column that I want to navigate on, and it becomes a filter within that document library. So I can select the value, and it's just another way of filtering. Okay, so what we'll quickly do, because we are running out of time, So if we come into the site settings for this site, one of the things that I have access to under site administration is my term store management. If I go into this, it takes me into my term store. So what I can do is expand the groups, expand products and technologies. And if I come into here somewhere, so there's my service group that we had. And against each term, we can add in synonyms. Now, the nice thing with synonyms is it'll display the list of synonyms within the interface, but it will not allow the user to select it. So we can say, well, a server means this or this or this. But the keyword that you're going to put in is server. Yeah, so we've given them the keyword. We've given them the label for that word, but then we've said, well, it also means this, this, and this, and that will be shown to them as well. Yeah, so it basically says, okay, for Panasonic, you could also put in X, Y, and Z. Yeah, different brand names that Panasonic may well have.
Are terms supported in Foundation?
No. No, they're not, because you need the managed metadata service, and you don't have that in Foundation, unfortunately.
And if you need to rename a term, I'm assuming it pushes that term back down through.
Yep.
When you select term stories at the top where you've got English there, is it? Just so you can select a different on the...
Depending on the language packs that I've got in place. The nice thing with these terms as well, just quickly, they will deal with multi-languages. So if I have different language packs installed on the server, as long as I've had those terms translated, obviously the translation itself isn't going to happen, but as long as I've had the terms translated, it doesn't matter which language I put the term in. If I switch to the other languages, it'll have the appropriate term, the appropriate language against that document. Okay.
Well, you just happen to pull your term taxonomies term store English as well as the language English. So and pull down slightly above your arrow.
Where are you on it?
There.
Here.
Yeah.
No, that's just the heading within the interface, and then that's the language based on what language I've got installed.
So if you wanted to just select a different term, how would you do that?
In here, there's only one term store per service application. Yeah. Okay. We are out of time, folks.
So can you rename a keyword from the term store?
Yeah.
And then it will reflect through.
Yeah. Should push down.
So when your company starts changing its language, say, to occasional,
Yeah.
push those changes back.
Yeah. You should be able to push it down.
The content type ID,
Yeah.
you know whether they're the same as it pushes it through?
Yes, they will be. It should. Well, are the IDs the same? I'd have to find out for sure. I believe they are, but I'd have to find out for sure. Okay. Thanks, folks.
Is this connecting to search?
Yeah, it can do.